Starting tonight in the book of Samuel, we start with Samuel's father, a man named Elkanah. Elkanah had two wives. One of his wives bore him children, and the other one had no children. The wife who bore Elkanah no children, her name was Hannah. And every year, Elkanah would take his family, and they would go on a trip and leave town to go and worship God and make sacrifices to him. And when they went on these trips, Hannah, the wife who had no children, had an adversary, and every time she saw Hannah, she would provoke and mock Hannah due to the fact that she didn't have any children. And this caused Hannah to have great sadness, not having children in those times was very, very detrimental to women. And so this caused Hannah to be greatly sad, and she wept bitterly before the Lord. The important thing to remember is in Scripture it says that the Lord of hosts had shut up Hannah's womb. And when you hear the word host, Lord of hosts, host refers to God's angels. So he's the God of an army of angels. And it was him who had shut up Hannah's womb, despite the fact that she was a faithful and loving husband to Elkanah, and also worshiping the Lord of hosts faithfully as well. And so in Hannah's grief, she was weeping bitterly, and she stopped eating, and then she was crying out to God in prayer, and she, in her distress, cried out to God, and she said, God, if you let me have a son, I will commit this son to you fully every day of his life. We will teach him your ways, teach him your word, and we'll make sure that no razor comes upon this child's head. And then when she said no razor will come upon his head, in those times when someone was repenting from sin, they would shave off their head and shave off their beard as an offering to God for forgiveness. And so Hannah made that vow to God. She said, if you give me a son, I will teach him your ways every day, and he will never become in a situation where he has to shave off his head and his beard to ask for forgiveness from the Lord. As Hannah was praying to God, she was praying silently with only her lips moving, and one of the priests spotted her while she was praying, and due to the intensity of her prayer, the priest thought she was drunk. And so the priest's name was Eli. He went up to Hannah and told her to put her wine away, and Hannah, she said, no, I'm not drunk. I am just out of the bitterness of my grief and the abundance of my sorrows. I'm crying out to the Lord like this. And then Eli told her, he said, Hannah, the God of Israel has granted thee thy request. You will have a child. And so then the next morning, Hannah woke up early to go out and worship God. And then shortly after, Hannah ended up having the son that God promised her. What's important that we learn from this is that it's very important that we don't mock people, especially children of God, like Hannah's adversary did, because the scriptures say that it was God who had shut up Hannah's womb, and it wasn't on any ill will of her doing to God that caused this. And so we can look at the story of Job and the story of the Apostle Paul, how Job suffered great grief and Apostle Paul was locked up and deserted. And the point of this is that just because someone is going through struggles in life carnally, it doesn't mean that they don't have God with them or they lost God's favor. So it's very important that we don't mock people, and especially not to mock God's children, because there's a verse where Jesus Christ said that if you are to offend one of my little children, it would be better for you to get a millstone, hang it around your neck, and drown yourself in the ocean. A millstone is a very heavy boulder, and he's saying it would be better for you to drown yourself in the ocean than to offend one of my little children. Another key point from this is that it's very important that we continue to have faith and trust in God, even if we don't understand why we're going through certain things, because God has his reasons for doing things, and sometimes we don't understand why. And the story of Hannah can support this point, because she could have had a child at any time, but God was the one that withheld that child from her. And then when she cried out to God, God granted her her request, and then she gave birth to a child and committed that child to the God fully. And she named the child Samuel, which the book was written after. And then also, Hannah got to rejoice over her adversary that mocked her. And so this shows that God will vindicate his children, and he will also avenge his children and lift his children up to a point where they'll be exalted over those who mock them. We can also learn from Hannah's prayer of rejoice after God granted her request, and she bore a son and named him Samuel, who went on to be a great prophet for the Lord. And in Hannah's prayer after God did this, she said, "My heart rejoiced in the Lord, my horn." And when she says horn, she means that the Lord is her strength and power, and through God, that's where she gets her strength and power. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth is enlarged over my enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. There is none holy as the Lord, for there is none beside them, neither is there any rock like our God. Talk no more exceedingly proudly. Let not arrogancy come out of thy mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. They that were full of bread are now in want of it, and they that were hungry ceased. The barren have borne 7 children, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. The Lord killeth and maketh alive, he bringeth down to the grave and lifteth up. The Lord maketh poor and maketh rich, he bringeth low and lifteth up. He raised the poor out of the dust, and lifts up the beggar from the dunghill, to set him among princes, and inherit thrones of glory. So this was Hannah's prayer after God had vindicated her and avenged her, and bore her a child in front of her adversary, and let her adversary see it as well. The point where she says, "Talk no more exceedingly proudly. Let not arrogancy come out of thy mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed." This shows how God will avenge us. So always keep faith in God, always be graceful, and always be sure to not mock anyone, especially a child of God. Because once you start mocking God's children, and his word said it better than I can, it'd be best to get a millstone and hang it about your neck. So I hope you guys learn from this, and have a good evening.